Greetings, welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel, where we have been working on a series of videos on hide tanning, right, over the last year and a half or so, including some of these lovely smoke brain tan hides, okay? And one of the things these are really good for is making clothing. So I wanted to start making some things out of these. The first project being this pair of leggings and breech clout. So, if you're interested in how to do this, come join and follow along. I want to do a first sort of starter project with these that's not too unduly complicated, that doesn't have all the complexity of a modern tailored pattern. Okay? So we're going to make some leggings. We're going to make old style traditional one-piece leggings where each leg has its own legging and they tie at the waist. They tie at a belt at the waist. Okay? Now this style of legging is pretty culturally universal. You would just put cloth to cover what needed protected, when it needed protected, right? So these leggings would be one each leg, and then either a kilt or some sort of breech cloth arrangement to cover the waist, and then a shirt above, right? Very standard all over the world, right? Literally all over the world. And all genders, right? All peoples, all genders. This is sort of a universal way to make clothes because it's modular. You can put what you need where you need it at a certain time. It's also very simple to engineer. So you can take one sheet of leather, one deer worth of leather, okay? And you can wrap it, pin it, just mark it right where it needs to go, and then sew it up and have a legging. Okay? And if all of your hides look like this, beautiful solid piece with almost no holes in it, that'll work really well. Problem is, to convert deer from the running through the field state to the in the freezer and have donated leather state, you get holes. And sometimes you get big holes. This is the exit wound, and it makes me want to scream, "What were you using?" This is a butcher shop hide, right? I don't know what they were using, but holy moly, what were you using? It's a deer, not a tank, people. Anyway, and we want to be able to use pieces of leather like this. Now, could you cut these to an oval and sew them shut and just go to town with it? Yeah, of course you could. But to get better utilization out of hides, which have more problems in them, we're going to do a little bit of extra work and make a multi-piece pattern so that we can work pieces in like puzzle pieces around some of these trouble spots. Okay? Now to do this, you make your pattern off of your own measurements. So you need a flexible tape. You can also do this with a wire. So if you take a wire and you can bend it around your leg, bring them together and just put one twist in, and then untwist it and straighten it out. And where the kink is from that twist, that's the measurement. Right? You need to know how much material you need. You don't need to know in inches or centimeters exactly what that was, right? You're just making it for you, okay? But you need 4 measurements, okay? We need around the hip at the top of the INSEE. We need around the ankle at the bottom of the piece. Can they see this one? Mm-hmm. Okay. We need around the ankle at the bottom of the piece. And then, I'm not going to be able to do this standing up any way that you can see. You need the length from the bottom of the legging up to where your waist belt is going to be on the outside of the leg. And you need the same on the inside of the INSEE. You need those 4 measurements, and that's it. And you'll make a perfect legging. So I'm going to go take these measurements on myself jot down some notes, pull out a piece of large paper, and we'll start making a pattern. Now, I just have some big pieces of manila paper here. These are from pallet linings. Any store that has a lot of stuff coming in on full pallets is going to have a lot of these. You could also just get a roll of manila paper and it'll work just fine. The first thing I want to do is just mark a center line. And this doesn't have to be square to anything. We're going to square everything else off of this. Okay? And then we're going to take the tape measure and we're going to measure up here the inner inseam height. Okay? I'm going to put the stitching on the outside of the leg because I want to have a fringe down there. And then the inside where my legs rub together, that will be the middle of the fold. Okay, so this is going to be the short distance, then it will fold out, and the long distance will be out here. So, I'm going to put a couple marks and we'll come back. This is the inseam. Now I need to get the ankle circumference. I'm just going to put a square on this, and referencing off of this initial line, square out from there. You don't need to worry about, I'm doing this in Sharpie so you can see. It's going to mess up my square a little bit, but rubbing alcohol will take that right off. Now, around my calf, I need 12.5 inches. So half of that is 6 1/4. Okay. That's 6 1/4 right there. 6 1/4 right here. Okay, and then that's going to go out a bit. It's not going to go straight up. So the next thing, and this is going to also go out like that and like that. Okay. But now we need to measure up to the top. And this has to be a vertical measurement as well. So, let me get my tape line back up. Stick a knee on it. And I need 34 inches. And that one right there would be the same size, like 34 inches on me. That would be the same size as whatever pants you buy. Okay. And now the same thing. I'm going to come out from that mark. Okay. And now around the top, 20, 34, 26. So,
that would be 13.
Yes, indeed. Going to put a dot there at 13. And dot there at 13. Okay. Now I can mark the first cut line. Right there. Okay. And right there. So this center line and that at the top, that's just to reference off of. Because we're making horizontal measurements, but ultimately everything's going to be sloping in its cuts. So the next thing we need to do is to mark this from the top of the hip down to the bottom of the ankle. So I'm going to have to do sort of a double straight edge because I didn't grab a piece of lumber that was long enough. And we'll stretch the tape, put that down. Just kind of cheat. Because you can't run an accurate line from a flexible tape. There's that. And I'll come down here. And get that in there. Okay, it wasn't too awful bad. And ultimately I can fold, after I cut this all out, I can fold that over. I'm not going to draw this other side here on camera. So this is going to be the middle, it's going to be the inseam, but there won't be a seam there. This is going to be the outside, right along where this seam is on the pants, on the jeans I'm wearing. Okay, that's this line. That'll have a fringe in it. And the next thing we need is a sewing allowance, seam allowance. So I'm going to take my square, line up on this line, just put a couple of marks to measure on. Okay. Just like so. And now I'm going to come out and I'm just going to use 3/8 for a sewing allowance. 3/8 of an inch. You don't need a big 1/2 inch or 5/8 sewing allowance with leather because it's not going to ravel out the way cloth will. So a little less than a 1/2 inch is fine. And that will, 3/8 will even be more than I actually end up needing. But what I just did is important. You need to measure square out from this line to have a consistent line. Mm-hmm. That is an important thing. Okay? And then we'll carry this across here. And that actually intersects down here. Okay. So if we were going to cut this one piece, we would fold it, and this would be our pattern right on a fold in the cloth right there. Okay. Since I want to be able to piece this out of smaller regions of hide so I can work around holes, I need a place to put a cut line here. Okay? So again, I want to put that line right above my knee. So I'm going to come on my belt there and come down to right here. And that's 19 inches from this top. So I measure down 19 inches from that top. And that should put me right there. Now just double check. This is arbitrary. You can put this wherever you want. Right about there, down to here. About another 19 inches. Okay, so those aren't lining up a little bit. I need to actually stand up and do this. So rearranging a little bit, remeasuring that, 15 inches. It was getting stretched there because I was doing it crooked. And then, yep, that's right about 19. So that's a good mark. And then this, I do want to cut off square. Okay. So right there is a line. So this is going to be piece 1. This is going to be piece 2. This is going to be a fold. Okay? Now, I'm going to go ahead and cut this out. Then we're going to do a little bit of final modification before making a prototype. Okay? Now, in cutting this apart, we have what we need here, top and bottom, but we don't have a seam allowance. You could join these with a baseball stitch if you wanted, but I want to overlap and sew them together differently from that. So we need to add a little bit more room to draw on. So I'm going to take some painter's tape, just stick this piece onto it. Take another piece of painter's tape, line it up like that. And now again, we'll measure our 3/8 seam allowance. Okay. Since I've already marked this all up, might as well just go for it. And that way, and up that way. Okay. And then I can cut this out to that final line. And have a finished pattern piece. Okay, just like so. So there we've just added that extra little seam allowance, and that will allow for overlap with this, so that there's a little extra leather there to sew into. Okay? You're going to do the same on the bottom here, and then get into making a prototype out of some scrap cloth. Or two pattern pieces here, and to make a prototype, I'm just going to pin these to some scrap fabric. This is just a piece of junk bedsheet that is on the pile of junk bedsheet destined to be cut up for rags. So we're just going to give this one last bit of useful life, making a prototype before it goes all the way to ragland. Okay, pin this in a couple spots. Right through this really thin cardboard is thin enough, it's not a big deal to pin through it. Okay, take the second piece, we'll pin it in the same way. Now I'm only going to make the prototype for one leg. Sure that's pulled out. It keeps wanting to wrinkle because it's just been folded up in a pile for a long time. I'm only going to make a prototype for one leg. I'm not going to make a set of leggings out of old bedding rags. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm just using some fabric which has very little other usefulness, to make sure that my pattern is adequate. And you definitely want to do this. Think about how much time you spent tanning all of that buckskin. You don't want to cut it out, make it, have it not fit, or you might say, gosh golly gee whizzikers, I wish I'd have made a prototype. That's exactly what you'll say. Exactly what you'll say. So something like this is just made to fit your body in real time. Definitely want a prototype. Now with that pinned on, just gonna move this a little bit, And I'm just going to cut right around the pattern pieces. Okay. But at the same time, I want to make this accurate enough that it's a successful prototype, but I don't care about anything fancy or extra. Okay. Just has to be good enough to answer the question, when I make this out of buckskin, will it actually fit? So there's one piece cut out, I'll cut out the other, and then these sorts of leggings were historically worn in Europe, both with kilts and with breechcloths. They're worn in North America, both with kilts and with breechcloths. So you can make this in with either European or North American secondary adornment with either a kilt or a breechcloth and be accurate to the culture to which you belong. This is a second pattern that I made just, again, it's just the length I wanted, the width of my hips, this is for a breechcloth pattern, the width of my hips, and then the leg line from a pair of breeches that fits me well. I cut it in half in the same way I did this and used tape to mark for a seam allowance. And I'm going to also cut this off and make a prototype of it to make sure it fits. Okay. The advantage to having your legs and your middle coverings separate when you're working with leather is that leather stretches and holds that shape after having stretched. Okay. So like leather breeches did evolve from this, right? So old Germany, you had leather leggings and a leather kilt or loincloth. That is traditional old medieval Germanic garb. It evolved into lederhosen later on, but you're not, it's very difficult to size true pants in leather because you have to know how much they will stretch and undersize them that amount when you sew them. Okay, that's very difficult to do. That's why for simple sewn garments that the average farmer family would make back in the day, these things were separated, right? You have your pants in one unit, you have your midsection covering in another unit, whether that's breechcloth or kilt type midsection covering, okay? And when all of those things are fastened with a belt, every time you put them on, you adjust them by how you put them in the belt, okay? So you don't have that problem. That's why, before there was a, professional tailor class that everybody had the wealth to access, clothes worldwide were made this fashion in multiple pieces, okay? So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to cut this out. This video isn't about sewing cloth, so I'm going to do the rest of the cutout and sewing the prototype together, and then we'll come back and look at any fit adjustments. If you want to see another take on this sort of fitting on your body in real time, there's another channel called Skilltree that has a video where they make a medieval genre bathing suit, and they do it just this way, fitting to the person who will wear it in real time. Okay, so it's if you want to do something like this, you want to watch another take, another person doing the same thing, that would be a good one to watch. I'll put a link to that video down here in the description box. I'm going to sew this, and we'll see how it fits. So this is the apron slash breech clout part, and it's pretty good, but it's a whole lot longer than it needs to be. The legging is going to come all the way up to the base here, so it doesn't need to be this much overhang. So I'm just going to modify this right in place just to kind of get a basic idea here. Okay. This isn't going to be a super even hem line at this point. And I just have it pinned to a loose sloppy t-shirt anyway. So give me an idea in real time as it will be worn how much I need. Okay. Put one more in the middle. And this is just fine. This is why we prototype with junk cloth. Okay. Instead of, you know, if you do this in garbage cloth, this is going to be rags at the end of the project anyway, right? No big deal. Hem it, cut a little bit off, just make a marker, and I can make that modification in my pattern. You do this in leather, and now you're cutting off a 2-inch strip of leather that you don't have a clear use for. That's sad, right? So always prototype. So that's plenty of overhang length in this regard. Also, while you prototype, I made the first leg, okay, and everything seemed good, but oh my gosh, it fit like a wetsuit, right? That ain't good. I'm not a wearing clothes that fit like a wetsuit person, right? So this is why you prototype. So if you do this and it doesn't fit and you've cut it out and sewed this all together out of your hard to manufacture leather, you're now sad. You have to take the seam apart. You can salvage it by sewing in a 2-inch strip, which would give you something to do with this if you didn't prototype there. But still, we don't want to do that. So I went back, took the pattern, and again, you can modify these patterns with tape, right? So I added a 1-inch strip of tape here, which will, since this is folded and it's only half of the pattern, equates to 2 inches of circumference in the finished thingamabobber. There's a technical term for the day. Thingamabobber, okay? And then this is just sewed. I sewed that with an overlapping seam, and I just sewed this with a turned in seam. This is the seam I will use in the finished thing. And this new one, even though I'm putting it over jeans here, fits quite well. Okay, so you can see how that legging goes on. That will tie to a belt here. It's bunching up a little bit here in the upper portion, but again, this is over jeans, right? So if it fits at all over jeans, it'll fit great when it's the primary thing. And then the breech, this is the construction, the breech clout covers that whole line, and then the shirt that I'm going to make will come down to here, okay, and cover all of this. And you'll actually only see the bottom this much of the breech cloth at all, okay? The rest will be covered by the shirt. So that's how this construction goes together. This gives a lot of a freedom of motion when you're moving around. Again, these are garments that are intended to be worn by people that are running around the woods hunting deer, right? So gives a lot of freedom of motion there. Protects everything. There's full body privacy with this. And one of the things you need to know about buckskin when you're working on it with it is it soaks up water like a sponge. Okay? And like a sponge, it will transmit that soaked up water through all of the pieces of the garment that are attached. So if you have all of this put together in a full pair of pants and you get your ankle wet, your whole pants are soaked very, very quickly. But if you have these separated and you don't have this physically sewn, the leg physically sewn to the breech cloth, physically sewn to the waistband, latched down to the shirt, right? If you have gaps there where there's not a physical attachment, the rest of you stays dry. Okay, so even if your pant leg soaks up the water, it's not going to go anywhere else beyond just the pants leg. Okay, so now that we have a tested pattern, the prototype can go off to become the rags that it was destined to be, and we're ready to start picking out hides to cut the real McCoy. First, for the leggings, I have these two big ones. This was a big old buckskin, okay? And this one came out a little on the stiff side, especially here in the neck. That'll be like moccasin sole leather or something for another project. But this is big enough, even though I made this in 2 pieces so that it's possible to piece it together from smaller hides, I don't need to. So when I trace this out, I will trace this such that this is cut out in 1 piece, so I'll just have the single seam, and that will make construction a lot simpler. And simpler is better. I have this one, same deal, not quite as much extra on this one, okay? And get this out of the way. For the breechcloth portion, I have this one, which will allow me to get both of these. This one, the neck was cut off, so I don't have as much length, so it's not a great piece for cutting out the leggings. But as I discussed when fitting, I'm going to cut a little bit of length off of the bottom of the apron portion here of the breech clout, and these will fit up on this perfectly once I have done that. So we'll be able to get this whole project out of 3 hides. Now I have 9 hides to the point that they're all strewn. You can't see the periphery of the room. There's stuff strewn everywhere, so I could pick out the ones that were best for this project. If you want to be able to do this, to get the optimum use of your material like I am here, you need more hides than you need. That's just a rule. When you're cutting a pattern out of fabric and you have yard goods that is a consistent width, consistent length, consistent production, you know what you're getting. You just buy a length and put your pieces on it as the pattern describes, right? And most patterns already describe how best to cut your pieces for maximum utility out of a certain length of yard good. Every deer hide is a little bit different from every other deer hide, both because every animal is a little bit different in size, in thickness, in softness. When it's finished, they don't all finish up to the same softness. And then the, shall we say, procuring of the deer tends to leave holes in random places. So, you know, that's a further modification. And then there's the skinning process. Was there an error in skinning that left additional holes in additional random places that you have to work around? Now, I was able to find 3 nice ones that I can get this in whole patterns, but that is why I made it in 2 pieces. Okay, so that was possible. I do recommend, you know, the smaller pieces you are able to use, the better utility you'll get out of your hides. Mm-hmm. And you also want a selection of hides of the same size because there'll be different thicknesses. So here for leggings, I am choosing the thicker, stiffer hides, right? Because leggings take more abuse. For the shirt that I'm going to make is the next Brain Tan project, I'm going to use the thinner hides so that they breathe easier, okay, and aren't as hot when I'm wearing this in the summer for the Flint Knapping Powwow demonstrations that are the ultimate purpose of this. So you want to give yourself a selection, right? If you're going to do it, don't just think I need 3 pieces, I'll tan 3 hides. No, you do 3 pieces, you need 3 pieces, you tan 3 hides, you're still not going to have 3 hides that are just right for your project. You need to do extra. So here we go, we've made the modifications, and now it's just a function of tracing it right around here. Just doing this with a pencil, even if a little bit of the line ends up showing, it's not permanent. It'll wash off as this gets washed. Again, that's one of the really nice things about buckskin. Proper buckskin. It is washable. Now you see I've got some curves here
Try to flatten those out as best you can, but you're never going to get it all the way perfect because, ooh, that shifted. That we don't want. Let me mark this line, and I'll have that to reference off of if it shifts again on me. Okay. We have taken this hide off of a curved animal and flattened it out. So it's always going to have some wrinkles, especially here around spots where there's lots of extra curves going on, like where the legs meet the body and such things. Okay. It's going to have to be really good utilization of this hide. So when you're using these, I should mention this. The ideal layout is to have the length of your piece along the spine. Okay? Now you can have it shifted off the spine, right? Like you don't have to have it right here. But you want it along the spine. Because you have fairly consistent stretching in this direction and in this direction. So you can also have a piece laid out that way. What you don't want is a piece laid out crooked. Because then you're going to have different stretching in different directions and it won't hold its shape. So that does matter. Flatten out this wrinkle as best I can. Okay, now I'm just going to leave this and this edge uneven when I cut it out. Okay, so there we have both pieces marked. And then, just as though this was cloth, you take your bravery test, grit your teeth, and start cutting this wonderful thing that you have spent so much time tanning. And it cuts quite nice. You'll also see as you cut it, this is nice, consistent color all the way through. No core. This was successfully softened all the way through. You'll catch any mistakes that you made in the tanning as you cut this. This edge isn't... At this stage, I'm not planning to do any particular edge treatment on this. You don't really need it with this type of material. You can hem it, but that can get bulky. So if at any point I would decide it needed an edge treatment, I would take another piece, fold it over, and then sew that up like that. Because I'm not leaving a hem allowance, a turnover allowance on the sides of this. This isn't fabric. It won't ravel. It's solid. It's not moving. Okay? And then we can make some other decisions, like that little flap's kind of dumb, so I'm just going to cut that off like that. So I'm going to finish cutting this off. And then we'll look at laying out the leggings portion. If this was a cloth pattern, we would take pins and we would pin it directly to our fabric that's been folded in half. Yeah, that ain't going to work with leather. So you need another way to hold it. So I have some of these little paper binder clippy thingies. Okay. And I'm clipping it down on one side. Now this is a cardboard pattern, so it's not going to crinkle up. And this is leather. And as stretchy as it is, it's still not as stretchy as, you know, it's not as stretchy and wiggly as cloth. It never will be. It's a different material. So what we're going to do is we're going to clip this. Same idea as if this was a cloth pattern. We're going to start from where it's clipped. Come along here. Okay. And then as soon as we can get another clippy in, we can put it in there and we can move these along. Can't do it quite yet. It's getting in my way. Okay. That one's getting in my way too. But we can walk the clips along. So you cut this out. It actually cuts pretty darn nice. Okay. Now, I want to put one, it's going to kind of bunch this up a little bit. That's okay. I'll put one there just to keep that straight. So I'm coming along. Get out of my way there, Mr. Clippy. Okay. Now these pieces, don't throw these out. We're going to get use out of these on this project, but also future projects. Okay, so we're going to be sewing a welt into here, so we'll cut that out of some of these, and we're going to be sewing this with thonging, and we'll cut the thonging from these offcuts as well. Okay, so now I can shift the clip. Make sure everything's still nice and flat. Okay, that's good. Set her there, cut this off even. Okay, and down we go. As we come around, not far enough away, I can move the clip out to here. I'm just going to work my way around the pattern just as I've been doing. And there we go. We have our piece all cut out. If I pop all these clips off, we can open it up. And there's our piece for our leg. Okay. So, on to make a matching one, and then we'll start talking about cutting, thonging, and sewing this together. We have our four main pieces cut out here, okay? And in the process of doing that, we've created a lot of little offcuts. So we've got, that little hunk, and we've got this piece right here. And this is not scrap. Do not throw this away. Okay. One of the things about buckskin is it is very, very stretchy. Okay. So if you take the buckskin and you sew it with an extremely rigid thread, okay, whether that be a modern carpet thread or artificial or real sinew, and you do that on a piece that you're going to be wearing, as you shift and it stretches against itself, it can actually tear some of those threads. Okay, it can tear the thread holes, right? Or saw right through the leather. So one of the really the most traditional way to sew this stuff is to sew buckskin with buckskin. Okay, so we are going to cut thongs. Nothing to do with swimsuit styles. Okay, a thong is a strip of leather that's used to sew a piece of leather. And pieces like this are great for this purpose, for these little ancillary pieces that we're going to need to make. Now, we're also going to, again, we want to think ahead and get the best use out of the material that we have. So something like this, a long strip, okay, that's relatively thick, from here to here. This will be better used as a welt rather than cutting thonging. Okay, welt and fringe. Something like this, it's great for cutting some thonging. So it's really simple. We can go around a curve. It doesn't have to be a perfectly straight piece, but we don't want to go around a point. So I'm going to take this point, just kind of trim that a little bit. Okay. Then I'm going to come back here and just cut, about 1/4 inch. And you can go a little wider if it's a thin spot. And you can go a little narrower if it's a thick spot. Or a little wider if you have a wound that might create a weak spot. So like right here, that little spot there is a wound that the animal sustained in life. Okay. So just keep going around. Now it's coming back to a thinner spot, so I'm going to cut it a little wider. Now where this tapers out to the point, I'm going to let this piece of thong taper to a point. That's where it's going to insert into the holes. Okay? So there, you can see it went around that curve, but I still have a pretty darn straight piece of thonging. Okay? So that's what we're going to sew with. Now another way that we can cut thonging is out of a piece like this. Okay? If we want a long continuous piece, again, we need to ease all of the excessively sharp corners. Okay. And any tags like this, they'll cause problems. Ease that around. There's a little bit of stiffness here that I didn't cut out initially. A little bit up there. Just going to do a little bit more trimming on this. Yeah. I didn't trim this back far enough after doing the dressing. You'll always lose some edge. It's just something you have to accept. Trimming this back into good, flexible buckskin. Making sure it's nice and even. Okay. Now, if you watch me, so that's a scrap piece. That is genuinely scrap. Throw it out. Okay. Now, if you watched how I trimmed that, you have an idea what I'm going to do now. So we're going to make a long continuous piece of thonging by taking this, starting somewhere. And again, we always want to start on a taper, just like I did here, so we have a nice pokey bit to go. So we have a nice pokey bit to go in to the hide. Okay. And we can just cut a continuous strip. Got a little wide there. That would be a good width if it was a thin section, but this is a thicker piece. Okay, that's enough to get the idea. So even though, can you see all this, beloved? Mm-hmm. Okay. Even though I was cutting around a curved section, I have this nice straight piece. Little bit of thin spot there I'm going to have to be careful of. And here where I went around a corner, there's a little bit of a thick spot, so you'll just come as a second step and trim that down. and then it'll lay perfectly flat. Okay? So you can just go around in a spiral, spiraling in until you run out of leather, and you'll have a long strip of thonging to sew with. Before we get into the actual sewing of these pieces together, I want to talk a minute about the tools used. Now, when you're sewing leather, you don't just take a needle and jam it through like you do with cloth. You have to take an awl or a punch of some sort to make the hole. Okay? So I want to talk about awls. First, I have a couple of bone awls here. Okay? And these are just some scraps of this or that bone from some random project or whatever that have a pointy bit on them. Bone awls like this, they are really miserable to use on modern leathers, right? So if you have veg tan or even soft chrome tan that has the grain on, okay, these just kind of bounce off and mat up in the grain, and they don't penetrate well, okay? But they actually work remarkably well on buckskin, okay? Which makes sense, right? Because these were made for sewing buckskin historically, right? So that's totally logical. So these bone awls do work pretty well on buckskin, especially if you only have 1 or 2 layers that you're trying to go through. You can also use a metal awl. And I have a really nice metal awl that's in a box somewhere. So that I decided was an opportune moment to show how you can make a metal awl. So I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes with this little scrap of wood, okay? And I drilled a hole in the end, and I have a little bit of epoxy here, and we can just mix up that little bit of epoxy, okay? We can take this finishing nail. We want to be very careful that we don't get epoxy on our nice leather project. Gob a bunch of that here in this hole. I made way too much epoxy because I always make way too much epoxy. It is a thing that I do. Okay. And it seems to be in there pretty well. Make sure it's straight. This is a pretty quick set time epoxy. And we've just made a metal awl. Okay? Now, I will let this, and I'll actually sew on this project with this, because my nice one is, you know, in a box somewhere. Just want to make sure I get that straight as possible. But before I actually use this to sew with, I will let this epoxy harden, and then I'll take a file and I'll sharpen up the point of that nail a little bit. Okay, so I'll show you how such a very, very simple tool like that will work very well. This is not something you need to overthink. Okay, so we have a metal awl, we have bone awls. If you want to see how we make these, there's a video that I did on making bone needles, and it's exactly the same idea, just a little bigger and a little pointier. The link to that is right up above my head here at the moment, okay? And this is one of the bone needles that we actually made in that particular video, okay? From a little sliver of bone, again, from Random Project. Always keep, when you're carving bone, always keep your little slivers because they're good for these little things, okay? So, that's the first thing. And all. Now, we're going to be sewing with thonging. There's a couple ways you can do this. One is to just use your awl to open up a hole big enough that you can taper your thong and just poke it through the hole and pull it. That does work. The other is the idea of using a needle. But this is actually a little problematic because if you take a modern metal needle, okay, a modern metal needle flares, obviously it's exaggerated here in my hands, from a point toward the back. So they're kind of a triangular shape, right? So the greatest mass of metal is at the back of the needle. And then you're taking your thonging and you're folding it over, and now you're trying to pull a big mass of metal and a big wad of leather through a small hole. That doesn't work, okay? So there is a type of needle called a lacing needle that's made for use with leather lace in modern leather work and like saddle making. And what they are is it's a flat needle, and the back of the needle has a couple of teeth that stick up, and then there's the teeth sticking up, and then it has like a spring. Okay, and it just grab a piece of cardboard here. It just has the teeth and then the spring pinch the thonging against the teeth, so it stays flat. You can get those. I don't have any of those. I've never used any of those. I know that they exist. I just don't have one. But I was thinking about this, and it's very common to see needles made out of needle bones like these. And they always have the hole right here in the middle, kind of the same geometry of this. When you see historic examples, archaeological examples, they always have the hole in the middle of the needle. Now I was pondering these lacing needles and pondering these holes, and I've always thought that the hole is typically in the middle because of bone's tendency to split on a really thin edge. It has a grain, okay? And I still think that's at least partially true. But as I was pondering this, and pondering the shape of one of these, right? If you look at this as a European, you think, oh, it's already pointy here, so I don't have to do much. I'll just put the hole as far back as I can, and then this fat piece of the needle bone will be the back of the needle, and you'll thread it through like that. I'm going to suggest that that is completely wrong. I think this is the back of the needle. Okay? Because if you look at this, it tapers to almost nothing. Right? It tapers to almost nothing. It doesn't have that tailing wad, right?
All right.
So we're going to take and we're going to make the point of the needle carved out of this knob on the back. I've already done this on one. Okay? So this point is from the knob on the back of, hold it this way in my finger, might be a little easier to see. So this knob became this point, and this is the vanishing end right there, okay, for it being all cleaned up. So the fat end goes through first, and we can tuck the tail of our thonging here. Doesn't have to be in by much, just tucked. And now that just vanishes to nothing right along with the thonging, and we're not trying to pull a big loop. And I've done some experiments with this, and it works really well, and I'll show you that when we get to sewing. So this is a place where you can make something out of bone in a way that you really can't quite replicate with totally modern materials. Okay, so that's really cool. And we're going to sew up this with this particular needle bone needle. Now you're thinking, needle bone? I've never heard of a darn needle bone. Adam, what are you talking about? Well, I have another video where I show how to get these needle bones out of a deer leg. And again, the link is right up here at the top of the screen if you want to go watch that. So we're going to get to work sewing. And we're going to start not with these legs. We're going to start with the breech clout portion. And we're going to do an overlapped seam. I'm going to do 3 different types of seams in these leggings to show you a couple of different simple sewing styles. So an overlap seam is where you take the 2 places and you half lap them like this and then sew through. This prevents a big wad the way you get if you do a turned inseam the way you would always do with cloth. Okay? This works well with leather because leather will never ravel on you. A lot of the sewing in cloth is about containing the raveling so that your shirt or your pair of pants don't just fall apart into, you know, a mouse nest fuzzball of threads right along those cut edges. We don't have to worry about that with leather, but cloth is very thin and very easy to press flat with an iron. Leather is neither of those 2 things. Okay, so instead of not having to care about bulk buildup, but having to care a lot about raveling, This time we have to care about bulk buildup. That's a very important consideration that we always have to manage. And we don't have to care about raveling. So that leads to the redesign of some patterns and a different thought process in terms of how you go about sewing. So I'm going to go set this up with the proper seam allowance that I left myself in the pattern, and then we'll get to sewing on this. We're getting set up here. I'm using my clips again instead of pins, okay? Now if you didn't have this, if you were out in the woods fixing some camping gear, right, you didn't have these clips, could you still do this? Yes, you're just going to have to hold it and get everything lined up manually, and as you're getting started, it's going to be a pain in the neck, right? So I'm using them, but you could do this. People were sewing leather for tens of thousands of years before little metal clips existed, right? You can figure it out. It's just going to be a much bigger pain in the neck, right?
Teamwork.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of this was done with teamwork, right? Your pins can replace 2 or 3 pairs of hands. If you don't have them, then you need 2 or 3 pairs of hands. But you're in a village and you have the hands, right? So everybody's going to help. Okay, so preparing our thonging for attachment. Again, managing bulk is a really big issue. So we're not going to use any true knots, okay? So I started this off camera because it's kind of prone to ripping and you have to be really careful. But if you look at this piece, I have it tapered on one end, but I have it blunt and a little swollen out the other, okay? So I'm going to come and I'm going to poke a little hole. And again, I did start this off camera, okay? But I do need to widen it a little bit. This is very easy to rip. But you can see I'm poking a little hole in the tail end, okay? Now, also while I was getting this lined up, I did start my first hole with this awl, okay? And we need to widen this enough just by reaming it out. Now the nice thing about a smooth awl such as this is that you're getting in and you're pressing the felt apart. You're not cutting. Okay? You don't want to use a cutting tool for this. You want to use a smooth tool. It needs to be pointy enough that it can get in and do the job, but from there you want to just spread and stretch, not cut. Because when you spread and stretch, yes, you are going to tear a few of the protein fibers, but the majority are just going to be pressed away because they're relatively elastic, and then they will kind of seal back up over time and lock your stitches in place. So, where I set the needle, here's Mr. Needle. We'll put the end of the thonging through here. Okay. And then I have this grain side up, so the top is the inside of the garment. This is a thick piece of leather right here. Even with the clips, it can be a little tricky to get started, but you can see I can pull that through there. But you need to expand these holes a little bit more than I had. Okay. Pull through, and it pulls through very, very nicely. Take the needle off. And take the time to get everything arranged nice. Now we're going to pull this most of the way through, and then I'm going to take this end, because if I try to do this with the needle I will tear. Put it through that little hole. And instead of a knot, this is going to lock. Get it adjusted right. I want that hole right down. There. Okay.
When you are done, hold it up so people can see.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So there, you can see I have pulled through my tag, and that is going to fasten my thong to my piece of leather without a knot. Okay, so again, we're managing bulk. And now I don't need that other clip. Okay? Now, I'm going to put holes in this. Since this is fairly thick leather, I have to make a relatively wide hole to get the thonging through. Okay? I'm going to space these just a little bit more, right around a 1/2 inch. Okay? So down through for the next one. This is a good location for a practice if you haven't sewn a lot of leather, because this is just a hidden seam that you'll never see when you're wearing the garment. Get my needle. Down through we go. Oh boy, this is a really thick spot. Fortunately, if I need to push, I have leather handy. Don't want to poke it though. Need to make that a little wider. There we are. Okay. Now, every time you pull this through, you want to make sure that your thong lies completely flat. And it's going to have a tendency to get a little bit of a twist to it. So before you pull it all the way through, just work that twist out. And you can pull the twisted section through. And it will lay flat, just like so. Okay. So there's a second stitch. And I'm just going to keep going along with a simple stitch. I drew a line, again, this is the inside, this won't show. I drew a line here with a pencil. Okay. That will be underneath the stitching, and even if a little bit of it does show somewhere eventually, 1 or 2 washings of this garment, and it'll be gone. It's not a big deal. So again, just cycle, rinse, repeat. And if the other way again, if you don't have that needle, is you can straighten this out, and if you make the hole large enough, you can feed that right through. I've been liking using this needle a bit more than I like doing that. Line the hole a little. But with a little coaxing with the awl, it's stubborn, you can just feed it through on its own like that. Okay? So either of those can work. And we're just going to follow along with a simple stitch till we get to this end. So here we are all the way to the end. You can see the first row of stitches. Okay. Now, because this is such a short seam, I want to go back around and stitch in the voids. Okay, so I have double holding power here. If this was a really long run, there would be plenty of friction coming from both ends that this wouldn't bulge up, but I can pull on this and the stitches wiggle quite a bit, and I don't want the ends to come loose. So I am going to do a double run on this one. This time all of the holes are made, so that's the pro. The con is the holes already have a whole bunch of leather in them, so it can be a little bit trickier to get this through. So I'm going to come, just kind of press the thong to the side with the awl. Loop this back around. always I want to make sure it lays flat. Okay. I want that relatively tight, but I don't want to pull in, right? I don't want to bunch this up and wad it, right? So just get it set. Come back over.
Don't be
And-
hasty, little hobbit.
What, huh?
I said, don't be hasty, little hobbit.
Don't be hasty, little hobbit. Again, just go in with the awl and just kind of twirl it a little, ream that open. And come down through. You can see how nice that bone needle is actually working there. It's almost like things that have worked for tens of thousands of years work.
Crazy.
Crazy talk. Okay. And so we filled in that void and reinforced it. Okay, so I'm going to go all the way across like this. So this is the seam that we've created. You want to keep these as even as possible, especially if it's going to be somewhere that shows. Now, again, this is not somewhere that shows. It's just the butt of the pants, and they're going to be worn like that, right? So that's just going to be underneath the torso. Right? So that, don't worry about it. Do these sorts of things that aren't ever going to show first, and get your technique down and get used to it. Now, this is called a saddle stitch when you go both ways. A traditional saddle stitch you would do on 2 needles, going looping in and then back, and then in and then back, and then in and back, right, in one run. I did it this way because I wanted to end up where I started because of how I'm going to tuck this in, which is simply tucking this in. I'm just going to take the needle, I'm going to go under a couple of these stitches just to keep, and I'm doing this on the back side. So this is going to be flesh side in, grain side out. Of course, we don't have a grain, but it's been removed. Okay. But just tuck this in under a couple of stitches there. Get it organized. Okay. And I might do one more, just because I'm OCD. And that will hold that down just fine, and there's no knot. Okay? So if one of those would come untucked at some point in the life of the garment after a washing, I mean, that would only happen after a washing, right? You could always come and just poke that back under with the awl. And it's got a couple of tucks. So that's why I wanted to start and end at the same place, because this little attachment here is firmer than this little loopy business. Okay? If I did a traditional saddle stitch, started at one end, and then I had 2 loose ends here at this end, I'd be tucking one across the top and one across the bottom. And it wouldn't be as strong. Okay? So that is the first seam in our garment. Okay? Now if I set this aside, and that's done. Okay, right? This is the finished breechcloth. That's all I'm doing to it. Okay? You could cut that out in one piece, but cutting it out in 2 pieces lets me use the smaller hide, right? It's the whole point of making a multi-piece pattern on these things. So that brings us to the leggings. Now I'm going to do 2 different seams here in the leggings. If I just gather this on the edge is going to be joined. When I wrap this around my leg here at the top, okay, it fits well, but it fits a little tight over jeans. and I want this to be something that I can wear on top of a base layer, right? I want to be able to wear shorts underneath it. I want to be able to wear, some woolens underneath it if it's winter, some long johns. So I want a little bit more looseness in here, okay? So I'm going to do a turned inseam with a fringed welt here on the bottom, about between my hands. And I'm going to do a lacing tied in a bow at the top. So if I want to let it out a little bit, I can just loosen that lacing. If I want it a little tighter, I can just pull in that lacing. So I'm going to give myself a little adjustability at the top. Then I'll give two seams to demonstrate. I'm going to fully organize this off camera because I need to take my time, and it's going to take a bit of time to get all of this sorted out. Especially since this was cut a little bit off center. So this end is belly skin that's really flexible and has some extra folds in it, and that's going to have to be gathered well. Whereas this is right along the back, so this is some of the stiffest hide on the critter. Okay? But I want to show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to line these up so they're nice and even. And you can see these extra folds in here. So I'm going to have to account for those, gather them a bit. And the section that I'm going to do the lacing on is going to be about there. And I'm just going to actually use this as a gauge, right, when I do this fully. So we'll put a couple clips in there. And then this is going to be sewn with a welt. So a welt is a third piece of leather. And that's going to be something like this, okay? But this is going to be cut into a fringe that'll stick out the edge. So the flesh side is going to be turned in, the grain side turned out. So I'm going to sew this inside out the same way you would with cloth, and then the welt is going to go inside the seam, okay, like that. And then we will put some clips on it, okay, and then it will be sewed, and then this whole thing will be turned inside out. That will be revealed, and then we'll cut snips to make the fringe, okay? So I've got to cut enough welting to do both legs. I've got to cut enough thonging to do both legs. I've got to cut the welting so that it's a consistent width. Okay, you can see this is still just a scrap, just to show you the idea. And then I've got to get all of this little bit of loose stuff here gathered up nice and clipped well so that I can get a nice consistent straight seam. That's going to take a bit of time. I'm going to get all that organized and then we'll cut back in. We have made all of our preparations here for sewing. The welts that will become the fringe are in here. They're over length. They're just in. We will trim all of that after we turn the seam out. Okay, and you can see there's a lot of wrinkling in here. So this was in the hide before cutting it out, and you just kind of have to split the difference on it. Again, this is not flat cloth that was woven on a loom. This is skin that was wrapped around a very organic shaped critter, right? So it's not a flat sheet, right? It's not a perfectly flat sheet. So you will have that, and you will have more of that around the belly and the legs than you will in the back, right? So that's why a piece this large, this is right down the back, so that's nice and straight, okay? And then this inside is thinner and more wrinkled because that's where the belly and the legs were. So that just is what it is. You also are going to have some blemishes, right? Like there's a little hole here. I am going to completely ignore that. That doesn't even exist to me. And a slightly bigger hole here. I may or may not ignore that. I haven't decided yet. I can weave some thong through there. Just do, 3 pieces across and then 2 pieces down. Just literally weave them and fill that up. I haven't decided if that's worth the effort to do that or not. I'll see what it looks like when they're done. Okay? It would be easier to do before sewing them, but not a big deal even after. But that's just part of using these traditional natural materials. is having things like that. Okay? Now, on this one, especially since this back on that hide in particular is really, really thick. So I thought I would show using this little quick and dirty improvised awl that we made here in an earlier clip. The metal awl definitely makes life a lot easier when we get into thicker pieces like this and more layers. Right? The thinner stuff in a small number of layers, the going right in with the bone awl works quite well. But on this thicker stuff, having a pointy or thinner piece, especially to make your initial hole, is very much an advantage. However, you do want to make sure that you don't run that through your hand. Okay? Because that will not feel good. And you'll say, gosh golly, gee whizzikers, I wish I didn't just have a hole in my hand. And it's exactly
The point
what you're
is
gonna
to
say.
not go to the hospital.
Yeah, we don't want to go to the hospital. Okay. So, you still, this won't ream that, the metal awl won't ream that hole out wide enough to get your thonging through. So you still need a non-metallic pokey stick. Okay? But if you don't have bone access, and I mean, you do have bone access, right? You can use, this doesn't have to be a bone, this could be an antler, you could repurpose a dog chew, you could get like a cow bone for dog chew, right? You can get a bone, But if for whatever reason you don't, or you're doing a project, you don't have time or something, you could use wood to ream the hole out. If you don't have the bone. So we're just going to start sewing here, and we're going exactly the same way. It's a little tight. Exactly the same way we were before. Didn't ream that out quite enough. There we go. We're starting this exactly the same way we did before, with a little tab and a hole poked in it. So you can set that through there. Pull it tight, and that will start our sewing. Now, just like previously, this thong has been prepared. Takes a little fiddling here to get it all straight. So it's nice, even thickness. You don't want any cuts in it. And we'll start here at the bottom, because this bottom is where there's going to be the most tension on this. So starting this down here, we'll put that firm connection where you have the most tension. Okay? And now one at a time we can take the clips off and start sewing through with about the same spacing. And exactly the same method. What we're not going to do is double stitch this. So my piece of thonging is about 1.5 times the length. I'm going from one hand to the other. I'm leaving the top open for now. That will get sewn up more later. That little burr I made off. That won't hurt it. Still a perfectly usable needle. Just feel a little silly. So we're going through about 1.5 times the length of this whole sew line. So we have a little bit of extra material. Don't run out. And since we're only doing a single stitch line, you'll have just a little bit of tension, and that will create a gentle wave in the seam and the edge of the fringe. Now, while I'm sitting here sewing a little bit of this, I'm going to make this setup. This is for a specific purpose. I teach flint knapping demonstration every year at the Forksville Powwow in Pennsylvania. And I don't have native blood or a BIA card or those things, but have a long-term friendship with my neighbors. And I am here doing this, teaching these things at the powwow as an invited guest. And I'm making this to be part of that teaching. So I am making it in such a way that it kind of carries that flavor. But I'm not putting any particular adornment on it that is specific to a particular tribe or group. It's just simply a material and a way of construction. Leaving it the smoked natural color and adding a little bit of fringe will give it the right flavor, but will still be relatively generic. And that's kind of a key thing, because I have no intention of claiming anything that isn't mine to claim. Come as a friend, to teach as a friend, and this is just non-specifically of the right flavor for the particular venue. Okay. You can take this in many different directions. Different venues, different purposes. I've mentioned already in this video that the idea of leggings combined with breech clout or kilt or skirt in women's wear, pretty much worldwide universal, because it just makes sense. You're walking through the woods, bare-legged, you'll walk into some pucker brush, you walk out bloodied, and you think, I should wrap something around my legs next time I walk through there. Right? It's just a human experience that has been part of our existence as a species over a very large area for a very long time. Okay? So it's not simply a construction method of clothing that makes it belong to one culture or another. It's more what you do with it, how you present it, what the adornment is, materials choices. So if I were to take these leather leather leggings and combine them with a plaid woolen kilt, I would be solidly within the realm of clothing indicative of Northern Europe. The Celtic regions, obviously, but the oldest plaid materials that we have come from the Hallstatt salt mines in Switzerland. And the oldest drawings of people wearing plaid that we have are Roman depictions of the Iberians. So, the stereotypes that had been formed in modern time, I'm not going to say they're wrong, but they're incomplete. Okay? And that's something to think about, when you're doing this. We want to be respectful of people's sensibilities. We want to be respectful of our friends and neighbors, and not take particular cultural expressions or iconographies for granted. And all those little things and decorations and patterns that you see in artifacts hanging in museums, they all mean very specific things to the culture that created them. If you're not part of that culture, you can't assume that just because you saw it hanging in a museum, you know what it means or how to use it, or what is and is not offensive. But you, whoever you are, wherever you're watching this from, you have a native culture that is your own. And you can take this in some way or some variation on the theme or these techniques and apply them to a different garment. That got a little close to the edge because I was talking. But you see how we're going along there. And you can make the item which fits you and your family and your people and your experience and expresses that. And that's far more valuable than just making something that looks like something you saw once because you thought it looked cool. The expression, you do you, I think we need to change that a little bit. You learn you, then you know how to do you. So, I am going to keep stitching up the side of this legging. I'm going to go ahead and then do the other one and do the rest of this off camera. And then we'll pop back on and we'll talk about turning these inside out and doing the fringe in the next steps. So we have sewn these all the way up here. Right there's the starting point where we looped through the end of the thonging, and that end is tucked under this first stitch right there. Okay, and then it's just a simple running stitch all the way up. When we get up to this end, I back stitched 3 just so that we're not pulling on the loose end, as there's any pressure here. Okay. So I backstitched 3, cut it, and tucked under 3 stitches just like that to tuck the loose end. Okay, you can't cut it right off even with the end of your stitching, or it will start to unravel as it works and wears. Right. This isn't a nylon artificial sinew that you can just not cut and singe the ends and melt them together. This doesn't work that way, right? You have to leave an extra tag so it doesn't pull through, and then you have to tuck that tag so it doesn't drive you crazy as you're wearing the pants, right? So it's a different strategy. If you have two come to an end, yes, you can knot it, but again, you have to consider the bulk of that knot and where it's going, okay? I did use mostly this metal one through stitching both of these sets, okay? You can see there's the bits hanging for the fringe. This one, it's all one piece. This one is two pieces, but this is going to be cut into fringe. It'll dangle, and you won't see any of that detail when it's all finished. Using this mild steel nail, I did have to sharpen it a couple of times. That's just the downside to using a softer steel rather than a hardened steel. But you know what? The modern mild steel is harder and more durable than wrought iron. And a lot of awls were used for many thousands of years made out of wrought iron, which is about the same hardness as bronze, which was used for many more thousands of years, which is even harder than copper, which was used for many more thousands of years, right? Here in North America, copper industry starts 10,000 years ago. North American native people get to metal before Europe, actually, which is interesting. So people will get into these crazy arguments over you have to use this or this is the only thing that works. No, that's not a thing. That's not how reality works, right? These are ancient technologies. You just figure it out with what you have, right? It all works. And if you only have a bone awl, that will work just fine. It'll just take longer because, with the metal awl, I can go through all three layers at once. With the bone awl, I would have to go through all three layers individually. So it would take a little longer because I'd have to poke one and then reference it, and then poke the second, and then reference it, and then poke the third, and then put the stitch through. But it would absolutely work, right? So anytime you hear somebody starting an argument over this is the only way to do something, no, just move on and listen to somebody else. Okay? There's many ways to do things. Now, just like if this was a normal cloth sewing, right? I stitched on with it turned inside out, and now we can just pull it right side out. Okay? And you'll see now we have that hidden seam and we have the strip that will cut the fringe. And the last section I left unsewed through here because I'm going to make a slightly more adjustable seam in this. I'm going to make it a little less permanent. And I'm going to do it with a baseball stitch. Okay? Now, a baseball stitch is not complicated. Okay? We're just going to start the same way. Poke a hole with the metal awl. Ream it out a little bit with the bone. But now I'm going to pull my thonging through from both sides so that there's a loop in the middle.
Like a shoe.
This is exactly like lacing a shoe.
Okay.
This is exactly like lacing a shoe. If you know how to lace up a shoe, you know how to do the baseball stitch. Okay?
Cool.
So I want to get this centered, and my thonging is about 3.5 times the length of my stitch. Okay? Because I'm going up both sides from both ends, and a little extra because I'm just going to tie a knot in the top of this. So if I need to adjust it, like you wouldn't adjust it every day, but if I need to adjust it because I need to wear a thicker base layer or something like that, then it can just simply be unknotted, pull a little slack out, and then reknot it. Okay? So there's my second hole. Now where did I set my needle? This bone needle is still working marvelously. Okay, so can you see this well, beloved? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I have my loop on the inside. Okay. Now I'm going to go over the top and up from the bottom. From one side, and then same here. over the top, and up from the bottom. And you can do this either way, starting with that first loop on the inside or the outside. Okay. But what it's going to do is it's going to pull these ends together so that they touch like this, and I don't have to waste that extra fabric for the turning, or extra leather for the turning. Okay. So there's one baseball stitch. Now we'll punch another hole. Try to keep your holes as even as you can, because this is going to show. Well, at least it'll show if you look closely, right? This will be, this section of the pant legs will be pretty much covered by the shirt tail hanging down. Where did I sit down my needle?
It's in your lap.
It is in my lap. Thank you, beloved. Okay. And we're just going to keep weaving this. Try to work quickly and you get clumsy. That's a thing. And with a wide thonging, every other stitch is going to flip over. So you can see on this one it's grain side out, then on this one it's flesh side out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you're going to have that 45-degree fold on a long piece like that. Kind of messed up my end on that one. I will adjust that later. We'll pull through this hole. And then get it nice and organized so it lays flat. And there you go. So there's the first two stitches in the baseball stitch. I'm going to go all the way up, and then this will just be tied in a knot to finish it off at the top. Now that knot will be right here, okay, in the finished thing. But that's what we're doing. We're just going to go up the side with this, and this way, if I would be wearing these in cold weather, want to put some long johns or something underneath them, I can just tease these out all the way down, let them gap a little bit, and then have warmer clothes underneath. So it'll give me a little bit of adjustability there. Okay. Now you're not going to want to adjust this every time you wear them, because every time you do, you're going to put some strain on these holes, and eventually things will wear. Okay, wear through. That's not unrecoverable. You could just cut off a slip here, take another piece of leather in, and sew a patch, right? But we don't want to do that if we don't have to, right? So this is not going to be an every time you wear them thing, but it will allow for some modularity as you combine these with different types of clothing in different seasons. Okay, so that's why I'm doing this way. That's why I made this decision. And then my shirt tail will come right about to here, and then the fringe will start below the shirt tail. Okay, so I'm going to keep going up and do this, and I'll show you the result and jump on to the next step. So there you go. There's our seam all the way up. Now I stopped just a little bit shy of the top because we need to do one more thing up here. How these are going to attach to the belt and actually be held up, because we do want our pants to stay up. That's a key important factor of being pants, right? So we're going to take a loop of leather, put it through a hole here, and then that will tie over the belt. Okay, so it's just going to be a tie. Now, this particular piece of leather tapers to a pretty thin edge up here. Okay, If that's not true, you might not need to do what I'm just about to do. But because this tapers up so fine, I don't want to be holding the whole weight of this apparatus with one piece of thonging up here at the top and have that whole weight on some of the thinnest, weakest leather in this set. So what I'm starting to do on this side is I cut out a little piece, okay, and folded it over, and now we're just going to stitch a buttonhole around here and then poke through that, okay, and then I will trim this to a reasonably nice shape after the fact, after I've sewn it down. Okay, so I have extra material in here, and this is just a simple, you can start anywhere on this you want, buttonhole. But because I'm working up close to the edge, I'm going to do it just a little bit differently, and I'm not going to make a big enough hole to use this needle that I've been using going all the way through. I'm just going to place, see if I can do this so you can see it there, the end here, and then just poke that through with the end. The end of this needle, where it tapers off, is kind of flat and blunt, okay? So it's a good little pokey thing, a little pokey stick. So that'll go through there. Okay. Trying to be very careful not to tear anything. Go for the pokey stick. And just keep going along. Okay? There's our first stitch. Now, I am going to do this saddle stitch. So I'm going to go all the way around twice. Okay? And that's going to be a long, slow process because I'm going to be making pokey stick holes all the way around. Okay? And I'm going to have to wheedle it through with material already being in those holes. But I'm trying to have the absolute smallest hole possible. So doing this little thing is going to take longer than doing all of this. But you want to slow down and make sure you get the details right so you don't do all of this work and then have something which rips on you. That would be sad. Okay? However, I'm not going to bore you with all this. So I'm just going to keep going around, and then I'll show you how to attach a tassel to this that we can use to tie it onto a belt. You can see we've made a nice little, basically a grommet here. Okay, so I sewed around and then I trimmed it to where the sewings are. And I do recommend that you do things like this in this way. Cut your patch oversize, sew it, and then trim back to where the sewings actually land. It's a whole lot easier to get things lined up, to pierce through it with the awl, to get all of that going well, right? Leather, when you're holding these things, it's hard to hold. You can't pin it like cloth. And when you start, drilling through with an awl, you're pushing things out of the way. It can be difficult to get something, especially in the middle of another piece like this, lined up perfectly. So give yourself extra space around and then cut down to it. And then I have already pierced through the middle of this with the awl there. Okay, just make that a little wider. And you can see where we're going. Okay, so then we'll take another piece of thong here and just poke that through. And that's going to be the tie to hold this onto the belt. Okay? So to keep this in place and to keep that from falling out, there's one more little modification we can do. I'm going to pierce through the middle of that, just there. Okay. And then this is going to need a little coaxing, I'm pretty sure. This is another case where I don't want a big hole, so I'm just using the middle awl. And thread that through this one. Okay. Now I'm going to pull that really tight. So you see the one that is on your side is now folded over facing me and has been pierced and threaded, with the one which starts on my side and is now folded over facing you. So I'm going to pierce a small hole through that one. Okay. And now the one which was facing you is facing me will now be threaded through that hole. Even if you have a complete set of metal leather making tools, make yourself some pokey sticks like this. It's very handy. Okay. There. So now these are interlaced into each other. Each is pierced and threaded with the other. Okay. So that is a permanent tassel that will stay in place, that isn't going to go, fall off and get lost in the, as this is hanging in a closet somewhere, okay? And that you can tie to the belt. Now this leather is just from a cut-off belly strip here. It's a little bit on the thinner, weaker side, but, you can see this is an eminently replaceable piece, right? You could just use paracord in place of this piece of leather thong in a pinch, right? So, this is not, if this breaks, it is very easy to improvise, and you would assume that this will probably be the first piece to wear out, okay? So that's why we're just threading it and attaching it this way through a permanent hole in the garment that's reinforced, right? This is expendable, and deliberately so, okay? I want this to wear out faster than this, okay? This is easily replaced. This is intrinsic in the garment. Now, the other way you could do this same job would be if you left yourself another inch of leather up here, you could then fold that and just do a hem and accomplish the same grommet, okay? Why do one versus the other? Well, in this case, it's because I didn't think far enough ahead to leave myself that much extra leather, okay? So we'll fudge it by adding this piece. But also, if you're limited in the amount of leather that you have available and you just need to squeak every last little piece, okay? Keeping the main garment shorter, cutting around holes and blemishes, and then doing things like this grommet with a patch conserves material. Okay. So there are reasons why you would choose to do this, other than just, I didn't think about it. Okay. As I was going along and finishing this up, I realized, wait a minute, I didn't show all of the detail on how to finish these off. So when you're going around twice, the front side is going to look like this, with just an even set of stitches, just as though you saddle stitched it with 2 needles. The back, you're going to come around and you're going to end up meeting up on opposite sides of an open dash there. Okay? So to finish this off, what we want to do is just tie a simple overhand knot with the 2 pieces. Okay? And then cinch that really, really tight. Okay? Really tie that in. Okay. And then we're just going to go around and we're going to tuck. This one, the stitches got particularly tight. We're going to tuck our ends just like we had before. So it's going to be a little stubborn. Figures, you always end up with a stubborn one when you're doing the demonstration.
Of course.
not actually how you're supposed to plan things. You should always practice harder stuff and then demonstrate the easier stuff. This one of my stitches were a little smaller, so they got a little bit tighter. Okay. It's just like before, 3 tucks to hold the loose end. Okay. Then we'll tuck this one around the same, trim that off, and then just trim around here. To a nice half circle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you end up just right where we were there. Okay? That's all we do. Now, I'm going to set that aside. So, this one we've got our grommets in, we've got all of our tassels tied on. This is done except for the last cosmetic step of trimming this welt and cutting it into a fringe. So to trim it, you need a gauge. I'm just going to gauge off of my 4 fingers here because, you know, why not? There's no right or wrong length for a tassel. Typically, if people want to be showier, you'll have a slightly longer fringe. And if something is being made to actually roam around the woods, you'll have a shorter fringe so it doesn't get caught on briars. Okay? So the fringe can be whatever you want. I'm just going to go off of my fingers. Draw a straight line there. Now this will be the first trim. Going along here. You don't have to worry if any of your pencil marks show. They will rub off. They will wash off. Okay. So there's that cut. Now I want to cut this nice and square here. Across the bottom. And then to cut the fringe, we're just going to snip in every 1/4 inch or so. All the way along. Okay. Leave a little space between the base of your snip and the seam. This is just a slow, tedious process. Take your time. Get them as even as straight as possible. And that's going to be your fringe. So, at this point, it's just finishing up. I'm going to finish everything on both leggings and then try it on. Okay, well, here it is, everything put together. You can see how the 3 pieces are all aligned with the belt. Now, this is very much the wrong kind of belt to do this with, right? You want a flexible sash. Flexible leather, something cut from more of the buckskin itself, or something like a finger braid belt, right? You want that you can loop, tie, work with. It's very hard to get all of this adjusted and straight over a rigid leather belt. Okay, this is different purpose, but it's what I had for the moment. I am wearing jeans under here, don't worry, but I wanted to show how it's all put together. Okay, so here, these 2 grommets that we made with the ties, they are tying just in a bow tie right around the belt, and that holds the legging up. Okay, and the loincloth section goes under the body and goes over the belt. Okay, and again, you want a flexible belt, and you don't want to wear jeans under these. Right? This is not the best arrangement, but
you know, we want to keep everything nice and decent for YouTube here. So we will do it this way for the demonstration. The other leg goes on exactly the same way. Okay, tied right at a belt. So you do put your pants on one leg at a time with these. Anyhow, I hope that you have enjoyed this project. I hope that gives you some ideas for your own crafting, maybe a new way to stitch, a new way to work with leather, a new way to think about these things. Yeah, I hope that you will dig into you, who you are, your family history, some of the crafts and trades that go along with your culture, and incorporate some of these ideas into some of those things and express some of that history in the things that you make. If you've enjoyed this and wanted to contribute and help us to do more videos and some more bigger projects and get into some of the things that I really, really wish I could and just don't have either the time or the resources to, we have the Patreon link down there in the description if you wanted to come on and help us out with that a little bit. We would be most grateful. And I will see you here next time at Old Ways Rising Farm.